asking about translation, but everyone understands. Okay, so I'm really pleased to be here with singer, songwriter, band leader, etnomusicologist, Alsarah. Thank you for coming. Thank you for talking to me today. She's not only a singer and everything I mentioned, but she's also someone who is not afraid to express her strong political opinions in public and in relation to her art. I was stalking her Facebook profile yesterday a bit, so I'm going to read what she wrote last. I think it's a good beginning of the conversation. So you don't get to consume my art without my opinions. If you try, I will stick in your throat like a fish bone you didn't see coming and choke the life out of you. Let's give an applause for Alsarah. So first I would like to start our conversation because you studied ethnomusicology, and in many interviews you also talk about that and about different conceptions that concern ethnomusicology. So for my first question would be in relation to the infamous label world music. What do you think of it? What do you see under this label? Do you like it? What would you use instead of it, perhaps, if you would? That's my first question.
Okay. Well, hi, everybody. How are you? Thank you so much for this awesome introduction. I've never had anyone read any quotes from my social media before, and I'm kind of proud of them now. Anyways, but so how do I feel about the word world music, right? Let's start there. Well, for one, it means nothing. So I feel like it's totally useless as a genre description. It means absolutely nothing, especially considering like the number of subgenres we have to assign to EDM music, for example. How many subgenres are there in just this one genre of music? So how could the entire world outside of the West exist in one category? It does not make sense. It also situates the West outside of that category, because the idea of world music very much implies the world outside of the norm, right? The norm being the Western gaze looking down at the world, and the world is all the other people that have culture, because our culture is so normal, it's not even culture. It's just the norm. It's breathe. Everyone knows this, and this is the weird ethnographic shit we need to discuss. Excuse my language. So that's the inherent fundamental concept of world music, because it comes out of anthropology. And anthropology as a science is the idea of studying the other. And the other to who? The other to the West. So for me, that's the whole concept of it. But fundamentally, it was trying to do a good thing, right? In the beginning, it was the idea of world music was trying to be like, oh, there's music outside of the West and we should celebrate it and give it a genre. So it came from a good place. But, I feel like it just never moved from there. Just kind of like the idea of let's go and colonize Africa and Asia and say that we're doing it for their own good to develop their soul and give them purpose and tell them how to use their resources better. So in the same way, I translate the way world music was used and then was farmed. And then the way actual musicians were taken out of that context of it and used as tools and examples in it. So for me, world music as a word, as a genre, is inherently colonial. It's inherently vague, and it means nothing. It also leaves the sad West outside of the world, which I want to include you guys because we love you. We love the West. We want you guys to be a part of us. You guys have culture, and we like it. And so for me, my approach to world music has always been from a place of both love and hate. Love because I love the music, that it exists under this ginormous umbrella that includes so many different things. And then also hate because I also was super aware of the gaze that looked at me through it and that looks at all the other artists through it. So I think instead of world music, we should have genre-specific words and we should have region-specific words, just like we do for every kind of music in the world. If I went to Croatia, I would call it Croatian music. And once I got to Croatia, I would be like, oh, within Croatia, we've got traditional music. We have some psychedelic rock that happened in a certain time period. Then we have this, and we have that, right? These are all subgenres of that. Same with the West, same with the rest of the world. So I think it just needs to be eliminated, and we move into micro.
Okay. So how do you, as a musician, deal with you being, I mean, if you are pigeonholed in this category, like world music, or perhaps when this label and all this marketing behind it, also tries to, in a sense, whitewash some political or gender differences and inequalities that your music actually talks about and addresses?
Well, for one, I deal with it by refusing it. I absolutely refuse the label world music. And I came up with my own label in response to that. I was like, my music is from East Africa. It's inspired from Sudan and from Nubian songs of return. We're actually, we came out of a specific part of the world, a specific part of a time period in that world, of a genre within that genre. Like our music is inspired by Aghani al-Awda, which are the songs of return, which is a body of songs that came up right after the dam was built between the 1950s and that came up in the 1950s, the dam. And then the genre kind of started around that time period and dealt with a subject matter. And we also were inspired by Aghani al-Banat, which is girls' music from central Sudan, that's about the meeting place of different tribes and the women and the way we take those songs and take ownership of them. And how do you translate that into yourself as an artist who's a singer and a songwriter and wanting to write music? And you come from a tradition, because every artist comes from a tradition, every single one. And so this is the one we come from. So my answer was to come up with our own label, because a great writer, Audre Lorde, in the United States, once wrote in the 1960s that I pick a label for myself, because if I don't, they're going to pick a box for me and put me in it. And so I decided to pick one for myself. And I hope we can all find one for ourselves, to be honest.
Okay, so you mentioned the word tradition. I was wondering, if from one side you have this Western gaze of the world music concept and putting everything there, on the other hand you live in the diaspora, you live a life of an immigrant. Mm-hmm. But in your home country, I was watching your documentary, the documentary that she also did, the Beats of Antonio. And there I also heard things about the situation regarding music in Sudan, in the sense that the regime there is policing the music. Mm-hmm. and also, in a sense, prescribing what is traditional, what is authentic, what is okay and what is not, especially with the girls' music that you just mentioned. Could you talk a bit about that as well on the other side?
Well, from the other side, I always say that my approach to Sudanese music has always been as an insider-outsider. As someone who is of the culture and clearly from the region, and speaks the language fluently and understands the culture, I'm also an outsider, because I live outside. I've lived outside for the majority of my life, and I am seen as I'm seen as an other when I come in. I'm seen as someone who's familiar but not. And so that gives you a certain kind of relationship to the region. And also in Sudan, there is this idea that Sudan doesn't exist outside the capital, outside of Khartoum. And so for me to get to travel around all of the other areas and to really truly see with my eyes the way culture moves and is different from different spots around it, kind of it shifted my relationship with my own country. Like, it shifted my own relationship with that. For me, I felt like it liberated me finally, because I felt like I was no longer isolated in this. I always grew up feeling like I wasn't somehow Sudanese enough. Somehow I'm just not Sudanese enough, and then I'm not American enough, and I'm not anything else enough. And so I never understood what it is that it means to be of an identity enough. Like, what does that mean? How do you become enough of a thing? Are you enough yourself? What does that mean? And who gets to ask you that question, and why? And what is their relationship to that self? And then I went there, and in Sudan, it's, there's this, I realized, the magic of working on that documentary was realizing a lot of our struggles as Sudanese people was around this imaginary border that was created by colonial forces around us that roped in 7 different nations together. And we're trying to create one unified national identity and not leaving room for all the micro identities in there, because we are trying to imitate a colonial concept of a nation state. And that didn't work for us, and it's not working for us, and it's continuing to not work for us. And as I'm traveling around the entire world, it is not working for anyone. It's not working for the West. It's not working for Europe. It's not working for America. It's not working for Latin America. It's just not working, y'all. The nation state is a failure as a concept. And so
I was just about to ask you about nation states.
yeah, it is a freaking failure. Let me just tell you, it was invented 200 years ago, and we act like it was invented a long time ago. It was not. It's a new invention, and it's broken. And we just need to give it back to whoever came up with it and start from scratch. Just start from scratch.
Do you think that this identity, unifying of an identity that you just mentioned, that was happening in Sudan after the nation state was built, do you think it also could be one of the reasons for immigration, in a sense? That the reason for people like you leaving and people like your family,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The first waves of migration are usually an intellectual bleed. Like, people leave the first layer that gets attacked are the artists and the intelligentsia that are questioning the system deeply. And then you've got, after that, what happens is that the system keeps cracking down and breaking down until people need to move for both political and economic reasons after that. And so absolutely, yeah. A lot of us had to leave because we don't fit in. But I left for strictly political reasons. My parents left because my parents were both political activists, and we needed to go. We just needed to go. My dad got arrested. My mom took us out of the country, and then he had to escape. It was one of those, you read about it, like you watch about it in the movies thing, except it happened to me. So we left Sudan in one of those situations where we weren't expecting to leave. And it was very much about the regime cracking down, but it happened before YouTube, so nobody got to watch it. And so, you know what I mean? And so people can just pretend it didn't happen. And so we keep asking, and I feel like we always ask these questions like, why did this happen? Especially when the government's been deliberately trying to erase these sections of history in our identity, especially, and create this imaginary concept of self. So watching that happen in the home front, then leaving and going somewhere else and being questioned about what you are, and you're like, well, what my government says I am, I'm not, and that's why I'm leaving. And what you think I am, I'm not, and that's why you can't seem to see me fitting in here. But I seem to feel comfortable everywhere in my head. But what does that mean? Where do you get to be home?
So how do you feel when you come back now as an adult? Observing the political situation. Also, you had a concert there.
Mm-hmm.
In this, new role of someone who also established herself somewhere else and then coming back.
It's still tense. It's still tense. Navigating who you are is a conversation. It's not really like it's just a constant going conversation. And I think that's true for everybody, right? Like you wake up one day, you feel a certain type of way. A few weeks later, you feel another certain type of way, and you're shifting and changing with it. Going home for me now is finally, I think, feeling the least tense, because it's feeling the most free of memory. And I don't mean free of memory in terms of like I don't remember anything, but it feels like free of the weight of the memory. I felt like for so long my relationship with Sudan was weighted down by my parents' experience, weighted down by their expectations of how I should relate to that experience, weighed down by my experience as a young person there, weighed down by my experience as a teenager there and as a visitor there, and then finally stopped, working within the music, and it's really made me feel like I've built my own home that I'm carrying with me when I go there. So now I feel whenever I go home, I was like, yeah, I'm not from Khartoum, but that's okay to not be from Khartoum. You can still be Sudanese and not be from Khartoum. Because I've met so many hundreds and thousands of us who are not from Khartoum now. And meeting others that are dealing with the same thing you deal with is the best way to help you carry things. And that's why I always walk around telling people, I'm like, find your community. If your own community of bloodline has shunned you, find a chosen family and connect and make a community. Community is about people who see you, who witness you, who feel you. And I didn't see that until I went to the refugee camp.
So your nationality would be immigrant?
I think so.
Okay.
I think I'm going with that. You know, I want a passport that says immigrant for life.
So, but also in the diaspora, if you're an artist, whether it's music, literature, whatever basically you do, and you become recognizable to the wider community back home, or for in your case in the States, do you feel the pressure that's put on the diaspora as well, in the sense of some kind of responsibility, or if not responsibility, in the sense of you suddenly becoming, in the eyes of people approaching you, like the representative of the state that you left, because all of a sudden you have this voice and
being in the diaspora, there's always the pressure of performing your culture, right? You want to perform your culture for other people. You want to perform your culture for yourself sometimes, to remind yourself of who you are and where you come from. And it's really important for me on a personal level to get past that space, to get to a place of owning my culture and owning my culture as a diaspora. Because being a diaspora, it's like a bridge. You're a bridge between two places. You can see on both sides of the bridge and you understand both sides. It's not in that place or in that place. It's in between the places. Seeing both places, connecting those places. To me, that's what the diaspora is. And so, and I see the diaspora everywhere. And no matter what the cultural background that we come from, we utilize the same tools being in diaspora. When you choose to put on the traditional, when you take it off. When you put on the modern assimilator, when you take it off. When you put on the right name for that person, when you take it off. And everybody does that, by the way. It's not just people in the diaspora. People in the diaspora just make a fine art out of it because we see it so clearly. But everyone does it all the time. You're one way with your mom, and you're one way with your friend, and you're one way with your boss, and you're one way with that other person at the supermarket. You're different people for different people, and we only know. It's always interesting to see why we notice it and when we notice it. And I think the magic of being on the bridge is that you have a little bit of space from both cultures that you can see a little bit bigger picture, just a little bit bigger. Not the full picture, but just a little bigger.
Okay, so you mentioned before when we were talking and you were showing your T-shirt to me, so you can show it to the audience as well, that you're thinking of becoming an activist again. And I would like to ask you concerning your T-shirt, how do you see your place or your position, perspective as a female artist?
Well, I've never been a not female artist, so I don't know what the other perspective is. So my perspective is the only one I know. Mine, I don't know. I guess it's really, okay, so my parents are activists, okay? So I grew up an activist, and I quit when I was 20. I was quitting. It was a big fight in the house, and we had a fight about it. I was like, I'm not going to any more rallies. I'm not signing any more petitions. Stop eating up my weekends. I just want to be a person. I don't want to talk about anything. I like makeup and clothes. Okay? That's what the world I want to live in right now. The world of that. And my parents were like, yeah, good luck in that imaginary world you live in. And call us when you wake up. But it was like one of those things where I was like, no, I don't want the burden of feeling like I need to do more than what I need to do because I'm expected to because of who I am. When being moving from such a young age and being the daughter of political activists, I was like this idea of needing to explain and teach yourself to people is put onto you, and it's put onto almost a lot of immigrants. It's like the idea that you're here, when someone comes to, like, they want you to explain your culture and where you come from and all of that at the bar when you're just out here trying to have a beer and just be like, please go away. I am trying to be myself right now and not a symbol of anything. I'm just trying to be myself right now. And when where the line of yourself and the picture of a whole other people kind of start to blur. For me, a lot of that and that kind of forced responsibility made me want to kind of step back and be like, well, who am I as a person? And also, a lot of activists are so busy trying to change the system, they don't look at themselves and see all the problems that they have, all the microaggressions that they are practicing on people all day, every day. So how do you check yourself? And that means leaving yourself the time to be yourself, to be a person, and to not always think that you need to just work for other people. It takes a village to make change happen. Everybody needs to do their part in it. Not every one person needs to do everything. And so we need to figure out how to balance that. And for me, going back to activism was a big leap. Because I was like, no, my childhood rebellion is over. But it needed to happen because we're having conversations about things that I did not think I would need to have conversations about anymore. You know what I mean? Like the right of a person to have health care, the right of a person to have education, the right of a person to have clean drinking water, the right of a person to have an abortion if they need to. I don't know. It doesn't matter what your personal opinion on it from how you want to deal with it for your body, but setting up institutions whose job is to repress others and us watching it happen and then not interacting is crazy. A lot of people died for us to have the rights we have right now. Wake up. So that's the space I'm in right now. So I'm wearing a t-shirt about it. Because I really needed to have an argument with someone in New York recently about the right of a woman to have free health care. I was just like, and the right of a woman to have like a gynecologist, I can't. Anyways, I don't want to get into that. Let's not get into that. You have the right to control your body. You have the right to put your body where it needs to go. You have the right to exist wherever you need to exist that is safe for you. I don't care what the political border is. I don't care what the piece of paper says. We are people first and foremost. And if the nation state is going to ignore our humanity, then we can ignore the nation state. It's just that basic.
Okay, let's leave activism aside for.
Sorry, I got really angry.
No, it's good. But you said that let's not talk about it. So, well, you said at the beginning that you found your own label for your own music, which is East African retro pop. Mm-hmm. As I understand, you formed your band on the immigrant experience, as I read. And when I heard this label, I was wondering if it connects in a way to the music that was being produced in the 60s, in the 70s, after the nation state kind of like happened, and before all of this neo-colonialism started to show again. This funk that was
era,
yeah. Is it referring back to that, or?
Yes and no, but yes, actually, because a lot of the inspiration for me came from the retro pop that came from that era, which was about revamping and remodernizing things that were traditional in the different places. And I think for a lot of places in the quote-unquote third world, and I do mean the Vijay Prashad version of the third world, where it's like, you had the two worlds fighting and then a third world that of the nation. Anyways, you guys should read this book, History of the Third World. It's really exciting. Anyways, so there in the newly freed post-colonial world that happened, which is Africa, Asia, Latin America. I think right after colonization, there was a golden era of opening up and trying to connect to the rest of the world, like almost the beginning of a globalization. And with it came this idea of opening up musically and culturally to other places. And a lot of exchanges were happening between different countries based on a lot of different things. And a huge part of that was about taking culture and taking it to a modern space, to a more consumable urban space, really urbanizing culture, I think, more than anything, taking it from a rural center to an urban one. And how do you do that? And so for me, that time period was super inspiring because of all of the hope in it, and because it also revamped what I think is an age-old thing. Traditions are based on fusion, not on exclusion. And a lot of most cultures around the world have a moment in time where you meet other passersby coming through and you learn something from each other. People couldn't wait until they met other people coming in from far away. That's why so many cultures have sacred rules around hospitality around the traveler, because the idea of exchange is inherent to our traditions, human traditions around the world. And so for me, yeah, that was like a revamping of a golden era. And so for me, I feel like, right, we're entering into an era now where we're trying to really reestablish our identity as a globe, now that we're so much more in touch with each other, but we're somehow resisting that in touchness because, and we don't know how to deal with it. There's a lot of tension around it. So for me, I felt like right now reflects that time period, but with more nuclear weapons.
What are your what are the strongest influences on your music?
Oh, the strongest influences. I don't know. It's hard to say. I consume music like in a rabid manner. Um, I think.
Some.
I mean, yeah. I was like, ooh, so hard to say. I would say strongest influences. Okay, Ahmed Munib, who is to me is the grandfather of the Songs of Return. Really, like one of the main founders of that. Hamza ad-Din, the father of the Nubian diaspora. Gisma, one of my favorite Sudani singers, Ghannayat, from the women's music genre. Love her music to pieces. Kulthum and Fayrouz, classical Arabic icons who I also absolutely adore and were just bomb musicians. And Kulthum is quite possibly the best scatter in the world. I was like, once you like scatting, like improvising, one of the best improvisers in the universe, and we don't talk enough about that. So those people, Biku Dude from Tanzania, one of my favorite heroines of all time. That woman sang her whole life and recorded her first album when she was 89 and died at 102, having lived more lives than any of us will ever live. Huh? She was here? Ah, I knew it. I knew I liked this place for a reason. So she's amazing. Grace Jones, who I think really revolutionized the archetypes of what it means to be a black woman in the American pop scene. Bessie Smith, one of the best songwriters ever. Who else? Oh my God, there's so many. Nina Simone, another one of the most iconic songwriters ever. Abdelkader Salim. I mean, like, I can keep going for a long time. Do we have time for that? Okay.
Perhaps we can also start opening the questions
Yeah.
for the people in the audience. Just raise your voice.
Yeah, raise your voice. She knows everything. You're ready for everything.
Some questions? No?
How old were you when you left your country, Sudan?
I left Sudan when I was 8. We moved to Yemen, and from 8 to 12, I would come every year. And then when we were 12, I moved to the States. Then we took like a 9-year gap while we were figuring out papers.
Can I ask you how old are you now?
4,982.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, America makes time go by real fast.
But you now live in Brooklyn, right?
I do. I live
And
in Brooklyn. Before Brooklyn, I went to school in Connecticut for
How was
4
that?
years. It was awful. Connecticut's like the worst place ever. Don't ever go there. Yeah, actually, it is. It's way worse than Texas. Texas at least has more empty places. You could just go be alone. Like, it's cute desert. What's there to like hate? No, it's terrible. It's full of terrible people. Anyways, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead. Hi. Thank you.
There's always this idyllic idea of Africa as these 52 states that get along really, really well.
Right.
And in your influences, I realized a lot rest in the Arabic side of the African relation, and not necessarily the central, western, and southern African relations. So I just was really interested to how you view that relation of that internal African strife in itself.
I love that question, actually, because I talk about that question a lot. I think that question can be answered in simply saying that it costs more money to fly from Sudan to Senegal than it does to fly from Sudan to Slovenia. Okay? I think that answers that question for us. And it's all about also the colonial structures of dividing up Africa and what it decided Africa was. What is Arab Africa versus what is just random East Africa that's going to float away on its own versus Sub-Saharan Africa. And then South Africa is just doing its own thing. They don't like any of us. And so what does that even mean? They don't. They were just... Y'all don't like us.
Hi, I'm South African.
Y'all don't even like us.
Just to clarify, it's not that we don't like the rest of you.
Don't like us.
It's the global imperialist perception of what we are. You know, it's also just Sudan for us is the land of the blacks. So there's also like a historical reference to like the Arabic states and the black Africans, you know, so...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, prior to colonialism and meeting great old Europe, there was the fact that prior to that, colonialism to us and slavery to us came from the Arab states.
Completely.
So
I'm so happy you brought that up.
Yeah,
I am so happy you brought that up. I think that's an incredibly great point, which is also at the core of a lot of how Arab Africa sees itself and deals with itself, and how a lot of the issues that we have in Sudan around identity are centered. We've been in a non-stop war since 1956 because we have a government that has decided Sudan needs to be both Arab and Muslim, when literally 90% of the country is neither Arab nor Muslim. 90%.
I love that moment in the film when there's this soldier who's explaining a story about a guy who I think got drunk and couldn't remember the
azan, and so he said it in his own language. Yeah. Oh my God, that's so real. That is so real. I went to Dongola. The dude was not drunk. He just said it in his own language anyways. He was just like, what? It's Arabic stuff. And so, but you're right. You know, the idea of Sudan as being an Arab state because of the Turco-Arab colonization of the region, which we also never talk about, is a huge part of the tensions within Africa. Because people think that the colonization of Africa only started with the Europeans, when there was a colonization of East Africa and North Africa long before the Europeans arrived, and they needed to actually fight with the Ottomans for rule of the nations there. And so it went from one colonization directly into another colonization. And right now when you go to Sudan, people teach Sudanese history in public schools starting in the 1890s. It's like Sudan didn't exist before the 1890s. So you have a whole generation of people that knows nothing about its history and is going to grow up with only one concept of its history. When the idea of knowing your history is so important, and this is why regimes always go for the historians first, for the writers first, for anyone that could document memories and moments first, which goes artists, writers, philosophers, poets, the people, the intelligentsia. And so for me, it's very natural that Africa has the tension that it has right now within itself. It's completely natural. And I also see the micro tension of identities across all of Africa. All of us can't get along. We all have problems inside of ourselves, and we're like, we're busy fighting with this, we'll deal with you later. And because this idea of creating a national identity that we think Europe has gotten down. But the more I travel around Europe, the more I realize Europe also failed at this. That's why World War II happened. And I was like, oh my God, nobody tells you this stuff. And then you're in it and you're like, none of us are. This is why I was like, no, nation states are failure everywhere. None of us are working out around this. And it's as a result, you can say, and we're all just, I feel like constantly walking a fine line of war. Just a fine line of it, because everyone is just one action away from feeling like their identity is threatened towards extinction. Like, and the more you feel like you have to preserve who you are, the more closed off you become to otherness. If you feel celebrated, if you feel like you have no worry about being forgotten, that your culture could be forgotten or erased, you don't worry about preserving it ever. You, in fact, only worry about wanting to interact with others. Yeah, and so this is the world we live in. And we carry that trauma with us from Africa into the diaspora. But, the magic of the diaspora is that you get to see that trauma finally.
Do you think that the situation of back home, does it transfer to diaspora, in the sense of political issues among each other in the diaspora, or is this something that you don't notice?
No, you definitely notice it. You notice it in the beginning, but you see the phases of it. You can tell who's fresh off the boat, who's been there for a minute, and who's had kids there already, and they're just like, yo, listen, we're beyond that. So, you've got the people who just came, and they're like, no, I just want to hang out with my in-group like I had at home, and they are so worried about that. And then you've got people who've been there a minute longer, and they're like, yeah, I'll just kind of take anyone from the general region that speaks a similar language. We become a little less picky. And then you've got the kids that grew up there who are just like, anyone with parents that speak another language. That's the only rule. That's all I need. And so that's really what, like, the phases of it. And so I feel like it's one of those things, like, your relationship to the diaspora changes the longer you're in it. And so for me at this point, my rule is like, anybody who was born somewhere else is a friend.
So Brooklyn is a good place.
It's a great place. Everybody was born somewhere else.
Okay, perhaps my last question, which is kind of like my own question. What do you read? What do you like to read? And would you recommend some good pieces of literature, perhaps from Sudan or from somewhere else that you think that people should know or read more?
Oh, there's so many good books in the world. I don't know.
Just pick a random suggestion.
Okay. From Sudan, you need to read the classics. The Season of Migration to the North. You have to read that. He's our Shakespeare, but younger. And and The Wedding of Zayn is another great short by him. I personally really like nonfiction books.
Sure.
One of my favorite books is called Salt, A History of the World. And that book traces the rise of civilization and monetary fiscal values through the industrialization of salt and the mining of salt through different places. It is a great way to look at the world. I highly recommend that book. If you like really good fiction, the writer Octavia Butler is I think she was a prophet who just came to earth in the physical body of a writer. And you should read all of her books. She has a trilogy called Wild Seed you should read, Lilith Brood you should read. Kindred was, to be really honest, not my favorite one of hers. It was really good, though. I thought it was very complex. It's in its relationships between the protagonist, and the racial tension that she put in there. That was amazing. But the Wild Seed trilogy, I just loved the way she dealt with humanity and the concept of evolution in it. Lilith Brood, the way we deal with our tension around extinction and feeling like we might be wiped out. Oh my God, you could just take that and apply it to all your life. Like a healing balm of understanding. So those are all great books. The Diamond Age is a really great book about education and avatars.
Thank you. Any more questions? I guess we can continue informally.
Yeah. Let's chat, have some beers, hang out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. It was lovely.
Thank you so much for everything. Nice to see you guys.